Have you ever noticed that the sting of losing money feels, well, just way worse than the joy of finding that exact same amount? It's a feeling we all know, and it turns out there's a really powerful psychological reason for it. Today, we're diving into what's called loss aversion.
So, to really get a handle on this, let's kick things off with a simple puzzle. It's one that perfectly highlights this weird little quirk in how our brains are wired to think about winning and losing.
I mean, really think about that for a second. Finding a crisp $20 bill on the street? That's great. It's a nice little boost to your day for sure. But what about realizing you lost a 20? For most of us, that feeling of frustration, of annoyance, it's just so much more intense. So what's with the imbalance? We'll see, on one side, a gain feels like a pleasant, happy little surprise. But on the other, a loss feels like something was actually taken from you. It feels personal. And this super intense negative reaction we have to losing, compared to the kind of milder positive feeling from gaining, is a fundamental part of how we make decisions.
And this isn't just some random feeling or a personal quirk of yours. Nope, it's a well-documented cognitive bias. That's really just a fancy way of saying it's a predictable shortcut our brains take, a pattern in our thinking. And it has these huge implications for, well, pretty much everything.
To really understand why our brains do this, we need to jump into the world of behavioral economics and look at a landmark idea called prospect theory.
So, way back in 1979, two psychologists, Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, published this totally groundbreaking work. They showed that people, well, we don't always make the most logical choices, especially with money. This was a huge deal. It really shook up traditional economic thinking. And their work was so influential, it eventually earned Kahneman a Nobel Prize.
Okay, so right at the very heart of prospect theory is this concept, loss aversion. It's a simple but incredibly profound idea. It basically says that the negative feeling of a loss is roughly twice as intense as the positive feeling of an equivalent gain.
And you can really see this here. I mean, look at that gap in emotional impact. The psychological weight of losing $100 is just so much heavier than the lift you get from finding it. And this simple asymmetry, this is the engine behind so many of our choices that might otherwise seem completely irrational.
Now, here's where it gets really fascinating. One of the biggest consequences of loss aversion is how it completely flips our entire relationship with risk.
Okay, so when we're talking about potential gains, most of us become pretty risk averse. We would much rather take a guaranteed win, even if it's smaller, than gamble for a bigger prize. It's like we're hardwired to just lock in that gain and avoid the risk of walking away with nothing. But just look at what happens when you frame the exact same problem in terms of a loss. Our behavior completely flips on its head. Suddenly, faced with a sure loss of $500, we become risk seekers. We're actually more likely to take the 50-50 gamble of losing even more because it offers a chance of losing nothing at all. The pain of that guaranteed loss is so bad, we're willing to risk it all just to have a shot at avoiding it. This quote really gets to the science of it. Our emotional response isn't a straight line. For losses, that downward slope of pain is way steeper than the upward slope of pleasure for gains. That little kink in our perception is what changes everything.
All right, so let's pull this out of the laboratory and see how it actually shows up in the real world. Because once you know what to look for, you start seeing loss aversion absolutely everywhere.
You see it in the stock market, where investors will stubbornly hold on to losing stocks just to avoid the pain of making that loss real. Marketers use it all the time with their limited time offers that trigger our fear of missing out. It's even why governments automatically enroll people in retirement plans, because the friction of opting out, of losing that benefit, is a really powerful motivator.
So, loss aversion is clearly a powerful force. But here's the question. Is it always a simple, universal rule? Well, modern research has added some really important nuance to the story. For decades, the rule of thumb was pretty simple. Losses hurt about twice as much as gains feel good. This was the classic idea that made its way into all the textbooks and business schools. But as we've gotten better at measuring these things, a new question popped up. Is that 2 times rule really a constant? Does it actually apply to everyone in every single situation all the time? And it turns out the answer is not really. Today, behavioral scientists see that 2x rule as a super useful starting point, a great approximation, but definitely not an iron law of human nature. This table here kind of shows you how our thinking on this has evolved. The
The classic assumption put that pain multiplier at around 2 to 2.5 times. But if you look at the more recent measurements, they often find it's a bit lower, maybe closer to 1.3 or 1.4. It's still there, losses absolutely hurt more, but the sheer size of the effect isn't always so dramatic.
And the critical thing is, it's not a constant, because it really depends on the context. The effect seems to be much stronger when the stakes are higher. It also varies across different situations and even by demographics. In fact, some research shows it tends to go up with age and income, but actually decreases with more education.
So the really crucial point to take away from all this is that loss aversion is 100% a real and fundamental part of how we're wired. It shapes our choices in predictable ways, but its power isn't uniform. Think of it more like a dial, not just a simple on or off switch.
And that kind of leads to a final thought for you. Now that you can see this invisible force at play, now that you know your brain is literally hardwired to feel the sting of a loss more than the joy of a gain, what decision in your own life, big or small, are you going to look at in a totally new light?